Live. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. We are here again with our Digital SME Live. I'm Sebastiano Tofaletti, and I'm happy to be with you today and discuss with distinguished guests the topic of 5G challenges or opportunities for SMEs. I will be talking today to a couple of very distinguished guests. First of all, we have Robert McDougall from Vodafone Group, Head of Enterprise Public Policy, based in London. And then we have Jacques Megan, member of the board of the 5G Infrastructure Association and also CEO of company Interinov. He's based in Paris. So 5G is presented nowadays as a game changer, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises. This is really the technological evolution of the mobile networks after the 3G, 4G. The 5G is really coming as something that will have big changes or may have big changes, especially in the business environment. We know 5G will offer faster speed, higher capacity, and lower latency. We know that the penetration of the mobile adoption in companies and citizens is very high nowadays. So with all these, there is really a great expectation that SMEs, many SMEs or companies that want to be innovative will really adopt what is called the mobile first approach. But 5G is indeed, also a highly politically debated subject. We have this U.S. China row again on 5G. We have also connected to 5G. We have a lot of conspiracy theories that are now in the public debate. Some people are even thinking it's connected to COVID. There is a lot of different discussions that are going on related to 5G. We, first of all, definitely want to focus our conversation on what 5G is and what it can bring in terms of opportunities and challenges to SMEs. So maybe I will start with perhaps Robert from Vodafone. Would you like to maybe give your view of what 5G will bring in terms of disruption and what is really meant with this idea of mobile first? Why is it going to be a game changer, especially for SMEs, Robert?
Thank you, Sebastiano, and hello, everyone. Yes, maybe just a bit of context. I mean, at Vodafone, we firmly believe 5G is a really important part of Europe's digital transformation, and we want to play our part in that. We're investing in 5G spectrum across the European markets in which we operate, where it's available. We spent approximately 5 billion euros on 5G spectrum so far. And the point I'd like to make is it's happening. We're rolled out across 100 cities in Europe, and it's live in 8 different countries. Sebastiano, as you mentioned, it's incredibly relevant to the business sector. And the business sector is relevant to us. I mean, people may not necessarily know that, but actually approximately a third of our group service revenues are derived from business customers, and SMEs are a really important part of that. And so the services we provide, connectivity, which I guess is something a lot of people would associate with a company like Vodafone, but moving beyond that into innovations like the Internet of Things, and 5G will have a profound impact on all of those services.
Right. Perhaps I will try to ask a similar question then to the other speaker, to Jacques Megan from the 5G Association, Infrastructure Association. So, what do you see yourself in terms of opportunities for SMEs? Why is this going to be a game changer?
Thank you for the question, Sebastiano. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So actually, I might have a view that is slightly different from Robert, in the sense that I am more involved with the research and innovation ecosystem, looking at what is going to happen in a few years, rather than necessarily looking at what is happening now. So first of all, I think your perspective, Sebastiano, what you are raising is correct in the sense that 5G is going to be used by SMEs as much as by anyone else. So all the features that will be available with 5G that were not available previously, or the features that will be enhanced thanks to 5G versus 4G, for example, are going to be available to SMEs. And indeed, in Europe, we are doing, at least Europe is trying to do whatever we can at European level, member state level, to strengthen and increase the use of digital services by SMEs in general. Okay, and I'm not talking here about technological SMEs or high-tech SMEs, but every SMEs. I mean, the rate of adoption of digital services is still way too low with respect to what it should be. So that being said, when it comes to 5G, the main difference that we expect that 5G is going to bring with respect to the previous generations is actually not so much what you have been talking about in the usual domain of telecommunications and usage of the mobile phone by the people. What 5G, where it is going to be to make a difference, is actually because it is expected to start to invade other industrial sectors. You were mentioning, I will just mention one example to start with. You were mentioning lower latency as one of the important new features. Well, there are a number of trials in the automotive sector, you know, and in the automotive sector, latency is very important, because if cars start to be connected with each other, or start to get an interaction with, you know, fixed signs or fixed road equipment, then of course, if you want your car to brake when the next car is just in front of you, you don't want to wait until your video comes to the screen. I mean, it's not at all the same type of a feature that you need and of latency. So
this is Jack. This is the latency feature. What are we talking about in terms of milliseconds or even lower in terms of latency? With how long is going to take the reaction through the 5G network?
Well, it's what we call real time. I mean, it just cannot wait. You know, I mean. This I just wanted to point that out as an example of 5G features that is going to become critical when applied to what we call the vertical sectors.
Yes.
So automotive is one example. There are other examples. Of course, media and broadcasting is the first one that comes to mind, and probably it is going to be one of the first to adopt 5G technology, because it is so demanding in capacity, in latency. Latency is also important for gaming, for example, online gaming and that type of stuff. Although it's not life critical. I mean, some people might disagree with me, but it's not as life critical as in your car. And there are others. So in fact, when it comes to SMEs, that means that it is possible, when 5G features start to be introduced in those sectors, that it is going to, I mean, some disruption in the usual business models of those sectors may be disrupted. Obviously, the large players that are playing in these sectors are going to do whatever they can to manage between their previous business model and the new one or the evolution. But
Jacques, wait. Let me see what Robert wanted to say something on that point on the latency. Robert.
Well, thank you, Sebastiano. And it was actually made a little bit broader. It was just building on what Jack had said about the verticals, which, you know, I completely agree with. And I think 5G is very interesting because it's the first generation of mobile technology that's essentially been developed in conjunction with different verticals. So I think that's a really important characteristic of 5G, and the fact that it provides an evolution from 4G. But looking at SMEs in particular, I'd just like to sort of share some research that we did last year, because we actually canvassed the views of SMEs and startups, research that our UK team published last year. And I think it's quite interesting because it found the level of enthusiasm for 5G. 54% of those canvassed were more excited about 5G than any other emerging enterprise technology. And a really important point, 60% felt that 5G could close the gap on their more established rivals. So I think this idea of leapfrogging is really important. The fact that 5G can provide a platform for leapfrogging for small and medium-sized enterprises. So for example, we have a 5G hub in the UK where we work with startups in that context. But then the final point I wanted to make was, we do realize that SMEs they will require a different approach, and there'll be education that's required in terms of tailoring the benefits of 5G across different segments. You know, it's not just speed, as Jacques said, it's about latency. It's also about the density of devices that can be supported through 5G. It's about the increased control. So all of this points toward an additional added value with 5G. So we think that will require that collaborative approach where we work with different verticals, different customers, with SMEs in terms of realizing those benefits.
Yeah, I think what comes out is that definitely there is a need for, you know, a collaborative approach. It's not just Vodafone, it's not just the telecom providers. It's also the vertical sectors, and it's also government. And Jacques, in particular, you mentioned there is this role for government in providing public support for research innovation, for instance, to make sure Europe is also ahead of in the 5G race, and the adoption of 5G by SMEs in particular is there. So maybe you would like to explain a little bit what even is this public-private partnership, this 5G PPP, where you are involved yourself. What is it doing? What is the role of the European Commission there? What money is available? What is the goals? What is happening?
Okay, so actually the 5G public-private partnership was launched in 2014. So it is actually somewhat coming to an end, at least for its current stage. Okay, I mean, we can talk later about what is going to come afterwards, because of course, obviously, things are not going to stop there. It's a research and innovation program, which is actually conducted as its name stands, it's public-private. So there is the public part, which is the European Commission, which is putting public funding on the table. So in total, something around 700 million euro, okay, on the table. And then there is the private side, which is represented by the 5G Infrastructure Association, of which I am one of the board members, representing SMEs there. And actually, when you look at the total investment that is brought to the table, we calculated that there is a total investment of about 3.5 billion euro. So it's not only public money coming from the European Commission, it's also all what the private side is bringing to the table. It's not necessarily in cash, it's not necessarily money, but it's in-kind contribution, of course. There are many projects that were part of the 5G PPP. Basically, to make it very short, The first stage was research, okay, looking at new 5G features, how it could be working. The second stage was basically a feasibility stage, starting to investigate whether those 5G features and technology could work in some vertical sectors. And now we are well into the third phase, which is large-scale trials, okay? So we are now indeed performing a number of trials. Of course, there are other trials going on in Europe. It's not only trials part of the 5G PPP, and the sectors we have started to mention: automotive, industry, energy, health. I mean, there are trials going on, more or less, depending on the area. But once again, this is where 5G is expected to make the largest difference with respect to what happened before.
Let me ask you a question based on that, Jack. So, because you're doing these trials in the different sectors, etc., what are the business cases, the scenarios that look more promising for SMEs? Because, of course, you know, when we speak about automotive, people think about the manufacturers, and these are not SMEs. So, what is it SMEs can do in these different sectors?
Okay, actually, we were talking a little bit earlier about the potential disruption in business models. So this might happen in some of those sectors. I mean, I'm not sure exactly which ones. I think it's a little early because the 5G technology is not yet there, you know. I mean, there are trials, I mean, there are ideas, but we are going to see. The first, I mean, the trials that are, I would say, most promising today is probably in the media and broadcasting, in automotive, and in industry. All right, but I mean, I wouldn't bet, you know, on one sector or another at this stage. I think it's going to take time, you know. I mean, I was reading an article the other day stating that it's going to take 10 years to fully, you know, exploit what 5G can offer in those vertical sectors. I am personally convinced that there are opportunities for SMEs who are very knowledgeable and are already doing business in some vertical sectors. If these SMEs can grab and understand what 5G can bring to them and to their solutions, I think they will have a great opportunity in front of them. And one of my ideas, what I'm trying to promote, is to try and have more partnerships between technological SMEs working on 5G and those vertical SMEs who know already their sector very well. And Robert, I'm not saying this shall be done without the larger companies. It's of course an ecosystem, and SMEs need large companies and need the research institution as well. But I think there is something when it comes to disruption that SMEs can grab a little bit faster than the others. So maybe we should look into that.
I must say, Jacques, I like being the representative also from the European Digital SME Alliance. I obviously like very much what you said, but because one of the messages which we are really saying when we talk about digital technologies, digital transformation in general, is that this happens as a partnership between a digital provider, very often an SME itself, and a user SME. And this doesn't happen, it's not a one-off, it's a long-term partnership because it's an innovation partnership, it's a long-term project, because you need to rethink business models, you need to invent new things. And this is not just buying a product off the shelf, buying a software, etc. This is something that takes time. But let me get back to Robert, because on this question of what are really the application, the business cases for SMEs, because you mentioned, Robert, that 1/3 of the revenues of your company, Vodafone, comes actually from the business sector. So you probably have an idea of what are going to be the applications, the verticals, the sectors that are going to require this 5G technology the most. Where are the best opportunities? At least the low-hanging fruits, because then we know much more will happen. But the first sectors that will adopt this, what are they?
Yeah, no, thank you, Sebastiano. You know, Jacques has covered the automotive sector. I could talk at length about the automotive sector and trials underway in that sector. What I'd quite like to do actually is just to describe a little bit about IoT as providing a platform for SME innovation.
The Internet of Things, right?
Exactly, the Internet of Things, because I think, you know, Internet of Things can be enable and facilitate a transition to 5G. Let me talk a little bit about that, because you know we have an Internet of Things platform that we have approximately 100 million IoT devices in a variety of different sectors of the economy. Coming back to your question, you know, ranging from automotive to smart buildings to agriculture to health, you know, you name it. And I actually do not have a technological background, and I often think that the opportunity is only limited by the imagination of those people that are designing and developing those applications. So I am always incredibly excited about the potential. But let me say, just building on what Jacques said as well about the SME ecosystem, you know, we get that, we do recognize that. And actually in our role as an IoT provider, you know, we want to collaborate with other companies, with SMEs in terms of reaching those parts of the market that otherwise we may not be able to reach. And so that's why we have developed initiatives such as the Vodafone Business App Invent platform, which is basically provides the capability, provides the tools for third parties to develop applications, essentially to become end-to-end IoT solution providers. So we want to sort of share what we've done and then to collaborate, to work with others, work with the innovators in terms of, you know, ensuring that IoT and Internet of Things realizes its full potential. Because our experience actually, and I think maybe Jacques hinted at this, is that, you know, Internet of Things adoption within the SME sector is much lower than it is for larger corporates. Yes. And so that's a gap that we want to address, and we want to, you know, innovate through the App Invent platform, through partnering to help realize those opportunities.
Let me go more specific into this question about the Internet of Things, because we have many companies, what we call the system integrators. So IT yes. companies that bring technologies to other companies by means of integrating existing components. And one big application that seems to be, you know, very hot nowadays is the industrial Internet of Things. So how yes. you use the IoT in factory environments and so on to make sure that innovation takes place there in terms of there is more efficiencies, more productivity, and so on, lower maintenance, and so on. How do you think 5G can actually be used in this context of industrial IoT? Reminding the fact that, you know, you can do industrial IoT even without 5G. So what is it that 5G will bring to the table, will make possible, will make better, that is now not so easy to do without the 5G?
Sure. Well, I mean, in a manufacturing context, I think we would start to talk about an innovation like network slicing. So you have a particular industrial customer that will have a tailored network slice that will enable them to manage their installed base of connected devices more effectively, more efficiently, and also to do away with the need for cabling in an industrial environment. So, which is an important benefit for a lot of industrial customers. So I could give you an example. We have, you know, a case study of a German manufacturer of electric vehicles where we have installed what we call a private network within their factory. And so that is essentially a self-contained sort of 5G environment where they get that additional functionality where all the devices are connected within that environment, removing the need for the previous fixed assets. So it's a more efficient environment. They have more control over how those devices behave. They're able to program them to behave in a certain way. They're importantly able to respond if those devices are not behaving in the way that they should do. And there's another important benefit, I would say, in terms of applications in that environment, because you have the combination of a sort of a private network, but also the wide area network. So there's connectivity also more broadly between devices within that environment and in the environment outside. So you might have a car, for example, that might be connected in that environment, and then they can go out to a wide area environment and still have the 5G benefits that they would not otherwise have. So yeah, I mean, it's still it's still early days. That's a sort of, we've installed that about 6 months ago, so it's just in the early days, but hopefully that gives you an idea of some of the additional benefits that 5G can provide.
Okay, thank you, Jacques. Because you bring in also the experience of this 5G public-private partnership, and which has received public money to do these trials of the 5G technology. Do you have any insights about industrial, excuse me, industrial IoT? Has there been a pilot in that sector? Can you share any insight about that?
Okay, I will answer with two different aspects, I would say. First of all, we were surprised, I was surprised to see that Industry 4.0 manufacturing logistics was not necessarily one of the areas that was so much covered by the 5G PPP projects. I'm not exactly sure why it was like that. Other sectors were more covered than this one. At the same time, it is recognized as one of the key areas for the application of 5G. So there is some kind of a mismatch that I cannot really explain at this stage. Okay, we still believe in the 5G Association that this is a key area. We haven't seen that much happening, at least in the 5G PPP ecosystem. Let's see how it goes. Maybe it's a little bit early. I'm not sure. Now, with respect to IoT, not necessarily industrial IoT, IoT in general, that gives me the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what is planned after the 5G PPP. Actually, we all know, we are all convinced that 5G, as I said, is not going to impact only the telecom and ICT sector, but is going to go beyond that. And this is something that we have to consider for the future as well. And when we think about application in other areas, including industry and manufacturing, then of course there are complementary areas such as IoT, but also more and more artificial intelligence, things related to big data, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, 5G is going to incorporate somewhat or interact with those other technological areas. And actually, we call that smart networks and services. SNS is the new buzzword for the next European partnership that we are considering. And this smart networks and services partnership is going to include, the part of technology related to IoT, to AI, to big data, to components that relate to 5G and later to 6G. So for us, these areas are considered as complementary and are going to be somewhat incorporated all together the more we go into 5G deployment and the more we approach 6G.
By the way, because you're talking about 6G, let me just ask an open question to both of you. What are your views? What will be then the next generation? I mean, I'm sure it's probably too early to speak about it, but what is, in your opinion, the things that 6G should have compared to 5G? If you have a view on that, either of you who wants to answer this question.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the only thing I can say is that in the 5G PPP, there was a dedicated call for beyond 5G. Okay. And it was obviously more for medium to long-term research. I think industry is already very much busy with 5G. As we are saying, it's just being trialed. It's not even deployed or commercialized yet. So, and it's going to take, a number of years,
All right.
especially if it invades other sectors.
It is being deployed and commercialized in a number of places, but I don't disagree. It's not widespread deployment yet, but there is deployment.
Robert, where is nowadays in your knowledge 5G available in Europe? In which areas? In which cities?
Well, a number of Italy, your home country, Sebastiano. We have a lot of activity in Milan, for example. So we have various initiatives underway in Milan in lots of different verticals, a lot of verticals that Jacques mentioned. Healthcare, for example, we have connected ambulances to 5G, industrial environments. So that's one. Beyond that, in Germany, in Spain, in the UK, in Hungary. So there are a number of markets where the spectrum has been auctioned, and there are 5G. There's 5G availability and 5G trials. But I'd like to give another example of a 5G technology, which is narrowband IoT. And so this is part of the 5G family of technologies, and that is, as the name suggests, part of our IoT ecosystem. And that has additional benefits over other types of IoT devices. For example, a stronger signal, a longer battery life, which is important for when you have devices in certain areas, for example, in a basement, in a sort of power company, or also, and this is the point I'd like to make, in an agricultural environment where signal strength is more important. And so here we have a 5G technology where we have numerous customers, agricultural customers, as Vodafone across the EU, for example, collecting nutrient data, collecting soil data, ensuring efficiency of animal feeds, ensuring that farmers are able to respond quickly in the event of an emergency. And actually, we've done a bit of research in this area, and we analyzed the benefits of the data associated with these sorts of connected devices. And the point here, it's the data for our customers, not for us. So this is the customers that we're connecting. The value of sharing the data that's generated from those devices. We actually asked Deloitte, the consultancy Deloitte, to model that for us. And they calculated benefits in the EU of 35 billion euros in the agricultural sector alone, associated with the sharing of data from these connected devices. So I think that's a very important point. We know about Europe's data economy goals, which we absolutely support. And I think, IoT and getting the devices connected in terms of promoting the sharing of that type of data, which is NB-IoT as part of the 5G family of technologies, is a very important route to achieving that.
That's what you're saying is interesting also because you start replying to a question that we got from the audience from Ronis Maximidis, who's asking whether it is economically reasonable and relevant to have 5G in rural areas. So you said you have estimations of potential economic benefits for agriculture, for instance. Do you have any other insights? Do you think for your company itself, it would make sense to make the investment to roll out 5G in rural areas? Do you think you have enough, potential there?
It raises a lot of very important questions around network sharing, for example, and operators sharing networks in terms of addressing potential black spots in coverage. In the UK, for example, we have a shared rural network initiative, which we're deploying already. So we are essentially sharing the networks with other operators to make that deployment viable. Obviously, there are a number of competition considerations we need to think about when we do that, but that is something we're doing. We're doing that in Germany as well. just to give another example. So I think that's the point I would make. To reduce the cost of 5G deployment, increasing the policy debate is going to be on efficient models for network sharing.
All right.
Actually, when it comes to policy, I mean, when you look at what is going on in Europe or in the US, I mean, the deployment of the network is always a key issue, you know. So I think, I mean, the operators, obviously they have their business to do, and it's not always easy when you have one user every square kilometer. But this, from a policy perspective, from a government perspective, this is always something that they are pushing very much. In Europe, you can see that at European level, but also in each and every country. And, you know, very recently in the US, they also adopted a new law, you know, for broadband adoption, you know, all around the country. And you can imagine also in the US, you know, with so many rural areas, it's not so easy. So I think it is something that people know about. It's not always, of course, easy. It's not always, I mean, both from a technological and business perspective, but it's something that I think people are conscious about, and there are efforts being made.
On that specific matter, you know, the investment for the 5G infrastructure. So, in your opinion, who should pay? Who should pay for it? Should it be the telecom operators? Should it be publicly supported? Should it be? You know, some people are saying, you know, the OTT, those who use the bandwidth, the companies, I don't know, say Netflix or others who use the bandwidth, who should pay for it. So what is your views? Maybe I'll ask this to Robert, because I'm sure you have a view as Vodafone. I'm sure I presume Vodafone has made a big investment in that, but you're also calling for public support. So what is your take? What would you say to people who say we shouldn't use our own public money to pay for things that Vodafone could pay for? How would you answer that question?
Well, I would say that, yeah, we are rolling out 5G at the moment. As I said, I mentioned network sharing, that we're doing that in conjunction with other operators to reduce the cost of that deployment. So that's a model that we're already progressing. I think you touch on a very important point, Sebastiano, especially in the current climate, in terms of, you know, economic recovery and how Europe will recover from the current crisis, and the important role that 5G has to play in ensuring economic recovery and economic resilience. And I think that is a discussion where public subsidies absolutely have an important role to play. And actually, we fully support what the European Commission has highlighted in their recent recovery plan, where they highlight the important part that 5G has to play in the recovery. And yes, I do think, you know, I think subsidies are part of that. And we can already see, even before the crisis, initiatives like the Connecting Europe facility, where there is funding available for connecting cross-border automotive corridors between different member states, which I think is incredibly relevant as well. So the European Commission has set very clear objectives for 5G deployment across, for example, all public highways in the EU. And so I think they do recognize that, you know, public subsidies have an important role to play in ensuring that those targets are met.
And Jacques, on a similar note, because you have been part of you know, different initiatives related to research and innovation, and very often publicly supported. What is your experience in terms of participation of SMEs in those funded initiatives, like the 5G PPP, for instance? Has there been enough participation of SMEs? I know there was a target of 20% or something funding spent for SMEs. Are we satisfied with the results we have right now in terms of participation and money really spent and used by SMEs, or do you think we should be asking for more?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that, to my knowledge, I mean, at least in the ICT domain, I mean, I'm not necessarily aware of everything that is going on in other domains, but I think it was really the first time that in the contract that was signed, it was one of these of the criteria for showing the achievement and the success of the PPP was to state that there should be 20% SME participation. Okay, and I think this is very important to have such an objective, because it's always a reminder, you know, when people put a consortium to build projects together, that they need to involve SMEs, you know. I mean, it shouldn't be the case, ideally. I mean, SMEs should be there because they are bringing an added value, but, you know, the world being what it is, it's always good to have this kind of trigger. And actually, it is working quite well. I mean, today, the percentage in terms of funding received by the European Commission by SMEs is a little bit more than 19%, 19. And actually, just a few days ago, there was a deadline for a call where the Commission was requesting to have at least 50% SME participation. So hopefully, when we reach the end of the 5G PPP, we will have reached this 20% participation of SMEs, and hopefully a little bit more. Where I am, I mean, there are a number of success stories already available from SMEs. It's always difficult when you just finish a project, you know, to have a success story. Usually you have to wait 1, 2, 3 years before you actually see whether there is any commercial success out of what you have done. So, but we are starting to see that. So I am reasonably confident that as some SMEs are going to see good success stories out of the 5G PPP. Yes, indeed.
All right, thank you. Well, you know, I think the question is particularly relevant for us and for our audience because, you know, we know that, you know, there are billions of euros available for research and innovation, at least at the EU level, with programs like H2020 and in future Horizon Europe and Digital Europe program. We also know that, you know, very often larger companies, you know, they are the recipients of such funding instruments. And because they are very professionalized in the way they work, they can basically fund a good portion of their R&D through this public support. Whereas, you know, SMEs, this is a much more difficult type of audience to achieve, and it's much more difficult to work with them because they're smaller, they have less capabilities, and of course, if you think about the administration of doing a project like that, the Commission, obviously they cannot make two rules, one for the big company, one for the small one, but it is obvious that the small one will have less resources to deal with complex administrative requirements than the big one. So there should be some, in my opinion, some level of adaptation. We ourselves have recently requested that in the discussion for the multi-annual financial framework, the framework that goes up to 2024, the EU will assign 50% of the innovation budget to SMEs, because we are saying SMEs are 99% of the companies in Europe, and so they should receive at least 50%. Now, obviously, the targets are, as you said, much less ambitious, like 20%. But okay, yeah, I think it's a longer discussion. I'm sure, Robert, your company itself is a recipient of public funds. And I suppose you have experience in working directly with SMEs as well. Do you have a view of how these funds can help SMEs, you know, be part of the Vodafone itself, the value chain, the service, the global value chain of Vodafone? You certainly have SMEs who work with you. So what is the relationships you build also in terms of research and innovation with SMEs?
Okay, yeah. So one, I think I talked about the the App Invent platform, which is one example from an IoT point of view. So I've mentioned that. But another example I'd like to highlight is the wonderfully named 5G Dig project. And that is part of our innovation work stream, where we're basically looking for the latest and greatest startups and SMEs that we can work with in terms of realizing ideas that can leverage the benefits of 5G. And we've identified a number of vertical sectors to explore, for example, healthcare, industry 4.0, automotive, some of which we've talked about already. And actually, we're very proud that last year we were recognized by the Startup Europe Partnership for that activity. So that's something I'd certainly I'd highlight as something that we're keen to progress. In the context of public subsidies, I'll be honest with you, I don't have a lot of experience on public subsidies, so I'm probably not the best person within Vodafone to ask about that. And yeah.
It's okay. Let me ask you a different question where maybe hopefully you can give us just change slightly subject, because we promised in the beginning we will also talk about a bit more broadly about 5G, and I refer now to this ongoing conflict between US and China, which among the different things it has put 5G as one of the critical topics, and especially the supplies from the Chinese company Huawei that the US has been blocking Huawei and so on. What is the take of Vodafone in that respect? Do you work with Huawei? Do you have an opinion about that? Do you think there is, as it is being said, an issue of potential government interference, potential cybersecurity threats? On the other hand, we know that Huawei is from a technological point of view a very reliable, a very solid partner with prices that are very competitive. So how does Vodafone position itself in this discussion?
We think that the key issue here is a lack of supplier diversity for network equipment. So we think this lies at the heart of the concern over the resilience and security of critical national infrastructure. So our objective is to ensure a resilient EU vendor ecosystem. Past generations of this type of technology have comprised of fully integrated cell sites. So you have the radios, the hardware, the software provided by a single manufacturer in a closed environment. So what we are doing, what we are focused on, is moving towards open RAN and open interfaces with multiple vendors. So we are essentially promoting measures to inject competition into the supply chain. So we're taking that in an active role as part of the Open RAN Coalition, which is a body I'd like to highlight, which is going to ultimately lead to that increased supplier diversity. And back to industrial strategies, we think this sort of initiative, this Open RAN initiative, should be a central part of industrial strategies of Europe's industrial strategy going forward. And this will have implications for SMEs, because think about it, we're actually opening up a part of the market that was previously not exposed to competition. So there are opportunities for SMEs and startups to come in and to get active in this area and to start developing different parts of the service proposition.
Okay, that's very interesting. And is there already, active public support for such initiatives, or not? I mean, our policymakers have been saying, using Huawei is an issue, so we should probably diversify the supply. But have they actually supported concrete initiatives, as you are mentioning, to make sure that happens, or not yet?
Well, it's an ongoing process, Sebastiano. So yes, we've had a number of discussions with policymakers on this. We continue to have that discussion also in the context of the Open RAN Coalition. For those that are interested, I'd certainly encourage you to have a look at their website, because it paints a very clear picture of objectives and measures that are ongoing in this area.
In that respect, maybe to you or to Jacques, if he wants to try to answer, in terms of diversifying the supply of the 5G infrastructure, do you think there is a role also for SMEs in that regard, or do you think this is a matter only for very big companies?
Well, frankly, I'm not exactly sure, what kind of role SMEs could play in such a game, in such a political game. But if you allow me, I mean, I'd like to come back to this decision from the US. I think I mean, I don't want to comment on the decision itself. I mean, it's a political decision, and wherever it comes from and whatever the reason, this is not the point. The point is that it is there. Okay, it is here today, and we have to cope with that. I think there are some positive things that have come out of that for Europe. First of all, it has put security of the networks in the middle of the game, and I think this is good, because this is something. I mean, when we look, for example, at the 5G PPP, some of us were quite disappointed to see that security was addressed in many projects, but there were very, very few projects really addressing security in the network. And I personally think this is something that was not the right way. Okay, so I think again, a positive outcome of this US-China problem is that now everyone is looking at security. Then the second good thing, I think, that came out of that somewhat, I mean, of course, there were things that were already going on in parallel, is that now, and also because of the COVID-19 problem, that we could see that depending on only one source for certain equipment or services is certainly not the right thing to do. Okay, so I think now we hear more and more the term technological sovereignty, which is in the middle of the game. And obviously, this is something that is part of policies at European level and at member state level. Now, how can that influence, telcos that are by nature private companies? As Robert said, there are discussions going on all the time, trying to diversify the suppliers is one of the things. But I think that more and more Europe and the different member states are really concerned about being able to master their security one way or another. And by security, I mean every aspect of security, including one thing which is really central to the European values, which is privacy, but this is only one of the aspects.
Yeah, agree. All right, I think maybe we are getting towards the end, but maybe before that, I have a question for Robert. Sorry if it is a bit of a tricky one, because Jacques mentioned COVID-19. So many people have been saying recently, because we hear there is a lot of conspiracy theories. Some people believe that COVID-19 was a conspiracy that was connected with 5G and so on. So do you have any take on that? And this kind of a spread of fake news, which is happening essentially, I suppose, mainly through the social media. Do you have a take as a company on this kind of situation? Are you acting upon it? Are you calling on the policymakers to do anything? What is your strategy?
Yeah, well, such claims are reprehensible and baseless, and in many cases illegal when they contain an incitement to burn masts, for example. So these have been roundly condemned by governments and scientific bodies in the mainstream media, including the European Commission and the World Health Organization. And it has a damaging impact, and also very hard to understand and fathom in the context of the current crisis, why people would want to destroy the very communications infrastructure that's enabling businesses and communities to continue to function. So yes, I absolutely condemn it. What we would recommend from a policy point of view, given your question, is the revision of the e-commerce directive, I think, has a very important role to play. The e-commerce directive dates back to the year 2000 and sets in place the rules for those intermediaries that are hosting online content and the extent to which those intermediaries are responsible for the hosting of the online content. And we think those measures need to be seriously beefed up so that the intermediaries, the sites that are hosting and the platforms that are hosting that content need to take more active measures to remove it. So that's an ongoing policy dialogue where we're very active.
Thank you. And let me also ask you a question that is asked by the audience, by Dong Su. It might be an interesting question, especially to ask you, Robert, from Vodafone. It might be tricky. What is your take about fixed wireless access? So for 5G, so is this something that could be a possibility for SMEs? What is your opinion as a telecom operator?
Yeah, it potentially has a role to play. I think we talk about wireless. I think one point we haven't talked about is spectrum, and there's a whole another debate to be had about the basis in which spectrum has been allocated. And I know that it's one that's seen to be relevant for SMEs. In Germany, for example, the German regulator took the decision to take some spectrum out of the national process and set it aside for local use. We have a very clear position on that we think the costs of that sort of policy intervention can very much exceed the benefits, and we point to the results of the German auction in that respect. The key point I'd like to make is about spectrum leasing. So that is something as a company, we can see in the UK, for example, Ofcom took measures to promote spectrum leasing, and those are initiatives that we have underway. So, for example, if there is underused spectrum in a part of the country, we work with what's starting to be known as neutral host operators to sort of take that spectrum and make it available for new innovations, potentially in rural areas. So that's the point I would like to make on that. And I think it's also telling that in the German example, although spectrum is made available for local use, I think it's now public knowledge that a number of applications have been made. I think it's instructive that it seems to me the vast majority of those applications have been made by very large industrial companies. So yes, I think it's an ongoing discussion that we continue to follow closely.
Let me ask you another quick question before we close. Also from the audience, Ronis Maximidis is asking if Open RAN could support the new security requirements. If you have a view on any of you who has a view on this question. It doesn't seem.
Maybe we talk about security certification. I think that's, maybe the question, I don't know, Jacques, if you think that's one for you in terms of security certification for 5G, which, we're supportive of, ultimately having that, framework in place, which would be consistent across 5G technologies. So I think that would be my response to that in terms of pointing to and supporting the need for a coherent and consistent approach to security certification, which I know is on the roadmap.
All right. Look, before we close, let me give you the last minute or so for a final statement or anything you want to take away today, or anything you couldn't say and you really would like to say. So you have your own final statement. Jacques, I'll start with you.
Maybe just a couple of comments. Maybe first of all, this audience, and you are well aware, but we are. When it comes to 5G and in general new technology, we talk a lot about startups, but I want to remind everyone that there are many SMEs that are not startups and that are very innovative and doing stuff, and those are the ones also in the vertical sectors who will be knowledgeable and may have a role to play in the future of 5G. So and once again, concerning potential investment, one thing that we did not really discuss today, I know that the European Investment Bank is planning with the European Commission potential specific 5G investment plan for SMEs. I was invited in a workshop they organized in February, just before the COVID breakdown. So I hope that this is going to become more concrete, hopefully in 2021, and we will see some investment into new technology coming from Europe as well.
All right, thank you.
Projects.
Thank you, Jacques, for that. Robert, your last words.
Thank you, Sebastiano. Two brief points. I'd just like to reinforce the fact that SMEs are very important to Vodafone Group, very important customers to Vodafone Group, and I think that's been illustrated during the COVID-19 crisis, where supporting SMEs has been a central part of our 5-point plan. So there's lots of examples from our markets where we have put in place specific measures to make sure that SMEs are able to continue to have digital connectivity that we think is so important and vital to their resilience. And the other point I'd like to make, which I hope has come out of some of the examples that I've used, when we talk about Internet of Things, it's about wanting to collaborate and work with SME startups, recognizing that we need to take that collaborative approach to really maximize the benefits of this technology. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I agree with that. Okay, so with that, we conclude today's episode of Digital SME Live, 5G Opportunities and Challenges for SMEs, with speakers Robert McDougall and Jacques Magen. A recording of the live stream will be available on our website and on social media channels. Next week, we will discuss ethical AI. So tune in for that on Monday, the 29th of June, on our Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube channels. Thank you to the speakers and to all the viewers who watched the live discussion. I'm Sebastiano Tofaletti. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Right.